The following podcast is sponsored by Basico. At Basico, we understand your needs and pain points. Our expertise in CFO services, legal, finance IT, and people and payroll helps drive your business forward by inspiring change and challenging norms. We believe in deep explorative discussions and critical angles, the same spirit that fuels the Only Constant podcast hosted by our own Lasse Rindom. Discover more about Basico's vision and services at basico.dk. And if you like what you hear in this episode, please don't hesitate to share it with a friend. And now Lasse, take it away.
You are listening to The Only Constant, a podcast where we go beyond the usual discussions in technology and business and aim to explore more than explain. Join me for engaging discussions with a diverse range of global thought leaders as we seek to uncover new perspectives and insights in a free-flowing conversation.
My guest today is Mikkel Flyverbom, and I am your host, Lasse Rindom. Hi Mikkel, and welcome to The Only Constant. I'm super happy you're here with me today, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time. I think we started speaking about it in the summer, late summer, right?
I think so, August maybe, yeah. Great to be here.
It's really splendid that you took the time. I think you were extremely busy also at that time with lots of other interviews and also with global news outlets and everything. So we decided to postpone it for a while until things were a little bit quieter.
Yeah, it's calmer now. It's good.
So Mikkel, you're a professor of digital transformation, right? Mm-hmm. And you spent a lot of your career obviously then researching this topic. And a lot of businesses are obviously interested in whether these fail or succeed. So my question for you to begin with is really, is it that binary that you fail or you succeed with these things?
No, I obviously think you need to look at it from multiple perspectives and think about both where technologies come from. I mean, what are the kind of drivers of technology and what are the kind of realities they meet? So I think what I've been interested in is really to think about the shape that technologies come in, how are they packaged, how are they commercialized, how are they talked about on the one hand, and then how do these arrive in particular contexts, in organizations or in societies, or even in our private lives. So I think if you look at those things, it always becomes really complicated to say whether something fails or succeeds, and you have to look at all the kind of drivers and factors and dynamics that shape those types of relations between technologies and societies broadly.
I think I remember I read when I was doing a lot of RPA and automation that Sarah Burnett once said about RPA that it was digital dreams for legacy nightmares. I don't know if you heard that quote.
I didn't.
But it's around in that vein you're talking about it, right?
Well, I guess I'm talking about the kind of ambitions that a company may have or a developer may have for their product is often very different from the kind of needs of the people or the organizations that end up adopting those technologies. So this is why I think we need to explore so many different facets of life, of organizations, of societies, and of technology to make sense of what happens in those contexts. So really a kind of understanding of the political forces that drive digital transformations forward, the commercial forces, the kind of business logics, and the kind of technological features that are built into those systems or tools or whatever it is. And then on the other hand, all the kind of factors that shape how technologies are adopted, how they are understood, what kind of gaps they fill or what kind of unnecessary noise they create, and so on and so forth. And I think this is why in many ways, the history of technology has been full of these failures and these surprises and these kind of struggles with technology.
But don't you think it's maybe because we keep on thinking about technology as something that's, I think, box-shaped, and then the real world is flesh-shaped?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, so I mean, another problem obviously has been that the people who are really good at developing technology and really understand technology and its possibilities and its makeup often don't have the same understanding of societies or of people or of the mind or the work that particular people do in a particular setting. So that kind of mismatch or misalignment between what technologists are really good at and what societies actually need and how they operate, that kind of misalignment is a big part of the problem, and I think in the technology domain. It also is about our need or our lack of understanding when it comes to what technology is. I think we need to have a very kind of nuanced and broad understanding of what technology is. I mean, technology obviously is a tool that can be packaged in a box, but it's much more than that physical thing. It's also a kind of force that creates transformations, creates change, creates politics, ideologies, and so on and so forth. And it's also increasingly a kind of infrastructure in our society, a kind of backbone to the way society operates. So at least you need to think about technology in those three ways: as a tool, as a force, and as a kind of infrastructure.
I really like really like that, and I really like the infrastructure thing as well, because that's where sort of becomes hidden or invisible behind everything we're doing. And but it also made me think what you just said, that it seems there's an epistemic kind of mismatch in all of this, right? That people don't understand each other, and we think we'll get now we can make products faster. Yeah, but that doesn't mean you're aligned more with people and things, right? Alignment is more important than building product, right? And especially right now, I think that's the mantra as well, right?
Absolutely. So I think alignment and misalignment is in many ways what all my work is about at the moment, really to sort of pinpoint these types of problems that are about misalignment, that we're starting to realize that the dreams of technology developers may not actually be the hopes and visions of people and societies at the moment. So that kind of misalignment, and we see it in so many different contexts. We see it in kind of geopolitical conflicts at the moment, where China, the US, and Europe are heading in very different directions when it comes to technology. But we also see it simply in the kind of growing realization in organizations that every new digital tool may solve some problems, but it also creates a wealth of new problems. It may take away some work, but it actually also creates a lot of new work. So
we're fixing some complexity, but adding more complexity all the time as well.
Exactly.
Right? So you think are you getting more to do? Is there more stuff for you to research all the time?
Well, I have to say, if I look back at how I started my career, and I was always interested in technology. Back in the days, I was interested in Usenet groups and the internet when the internet started almost, and to look at what were the kind of potential of this technology for globalization, for kind of global interaction, communication. I'm a communication scholar, so I've always been interested in the kind of communication tools that we humans use and rely on. So I have to say that the kind of intersection between technology and politics or society that I've been interested in always was really not really a focus for many people back then. So
it's because it's difficult, right? It's complex, right? I think this. I'm a history major, right? And I always thought, there's the communications is language, and language is power, right? It's if you read just a little bit social constructivism and Foucault, you know these things, right? But I think a lot of people are missing that all the time. People think language is not. It doesn't really matter what we call things. It doesn't really matter how we. But I think, and I keep in the podcast as well coming back to this, the naming of things or the labels on things and the signifiance and signification, because for me it becomes so important all the time.
Absolutely.
But and it sounds like you're saying that people don't understand this, but is it really that simple to understand?
Well, I think
because you need to zoom out, right, to see these patterns, right?
Yeah, but you also need to have experience with these things. I think our early experience with the internet and early mobile phones and all sorts of digital technologies, these were experiences about sort of things becoming possible that were really difficult in the past. So suddenly it was easier to send a message to someone. You didn't have to wait for the letter to arrive. You didn't have to.
Are we talking about the printing press? Or
No, I'm talking. So all these things that were, full of friction in the past. Like you had to go home and check your voice messages and then go back into the city and meet whoever had left that message on your phone and so on and so forth. All these things got really easy and smart and frictionless. So I think to think about politics at that time was kind of, far-fetched. It was not really about these things. It was not about the kind of societal, political consequences of these technologies. So I think a lot of it has to do with simply not, as you said, obviously seeing the bigger picture, but also not having the experiences with the uses that these technologies could be put to down the road. So in many ways,
we have that, right? I said the printing press before as a joke, but it's really not a joke, right? Because it also meant you could centralize power in ways you couldn't do before, and autocracies, I would say, came from the printing press, right? Because suddenly you could control your country. Kings had to travel the land before.
Well, I would talk about the printing press as the opposite, as a kind of decentralization of power, as a kind of moment where information in an early form was set free. So you have to think about before the printing press, the only institution that had the resources to copy text and distribute text was the church. So the church was in many ways able to control who had access to information, which books got copied, and this was copied by hand back in those days. Yes. And the printing press in many ways set information free in an early form, at least. That suddenly we could have other types of text than the Bible getting printed and shared and so on and so forth.
Also laws, right? I just think that all of the explosion of social control in the 15th and 16th and especially in the 17th century was also, exacerbated by the power of being able to print these things in mass and distribute them everywhere. Your mind control from different priests were suddenly adhering. Back before, people were not adhering to rules. Everything was a little bit chaotic,
That's true.
As long as you didn't rebel, no one really cared, right?
That's true. And this is, I think, what's interesting about looking at the history of technology, communication technologies, that even today, when we got the internet, when we, have artificial intelligence and so on and so forth, these are always, in ways, possibilities of setting information free, for sharing information in new ways, for lowering the barrier of access to information and so on and so forth. But as a result, every time we see some new players that end up, again, dominating who has access, who has, and so on and so forth. So the internet is an example of this, social media, platforms, and increasingly AI are also examples of this, that these technologies have the kind of potential to set information free and democratize information in really amazing ways. But in the end, we always have some new types of gatekeepers, some new types of...
There's always some mind control in this, right? Every time we have new communications, there's mind control, or radio, or whatever. Was it Hitler who used the radio a lot also to control, it's just, there's always a, this flip side of...
Yeah, so this is what I'm always interested in, the kind of many dynamics that get combined in these types of transformations. Technologies, ideologies, commercial forces, all these types of
what is
actors.
the AI ideology coming out of this?
Well, we certainly see both. The same kind of pattern, that AI is introduced and also has the potential to really give us all access to knowledge, information in ways. It lowers the barrier when it comes to knowing things. We will have less need for consultants, for professors, for authors.
There goes our jobs.
Yes, in some ways. But on the other hand, we also see that these technologies are dominated by a handful of players who more or less set the terms and conditions for how we get access to these, what kind of shapes they take, what kind of gaps they fill, or what kind of ideological concrete projects they're sort of tied to. So right now, we have a situation where, again, and this in this setting, it's a handful of American companies that are more or less setting the rules of the game for what AI will be and can be, and who has access, in what form, and so on and so forth. So that means, obviously, when we have a situation where the American technology companies are becoming very closely aligned or allies with the new American president, and there are some kind of ideological overlaps between those projects, then we're in a very particular situation in Europe and the rest of the world, because it becomes very obvious that if this political project is kind of against what we want, and the US is no longer an ally as it used to be, maybe actually an enemy if they want to take territory away from Denmark and so on and so forth in the shape of Greenland, maybe we're in a situation where it's really, really dangerous to be so dependent on technologies that come out of that alliance and is more or less coded in ways that emanate from that political project. So
I think that the notions you're mentioning here has sort of accelerated, obviously a lot over the last, especially in Denmark as well, with the Greenland situation and all that. But because when starting the podcast just 2.5 years ago, I said I want to have it be about technology, and obviously knew that there were technologies never neutral and all that. But and Google is evil, right? As I grew up a millennial, and I grew up in peace, prosperity, and the illusion of tech being only for good, and Google being altruistic and free, right? And then I realized, okay, it isn't. But then it seems like in the last 3 years, there's been an aggressive curtain fall on that. Before maybe Google, Facebook, they peered their heads out and be like, well, we are monsters too, yeah. But suddenly it's all freak show. If you understand my point here. With also, XAI being so clear about and outspoken about how they are grounding their models in political ways, right? And it's super weird, right? Isn't it weird what's going on here, right? I think it's... But I just, I want to ask you, what created this illusion, right? And did you also join in on it back when I believed in Google and the world of the good? Did you believe in that as well? And
I think I lost trust in these companies earlier than this, than what you mentioned. And I think what we see now is a kind of acceleration of some patterns and some problems that a lot of people in my field have actually identified for a long time. So in my circles, there's this meme circulating of this person asking, why didn't some professor tell us about this 20 years ago before everything exploded and we lost control of our digital technologies and so on. So there are these old grumpy people who were never heard and who never really managed to convince anyone that we're up against some forces that were, if not evil, at least misaligned with the kind of normal workings of society and the kind of values that everyone in Europe at least agrees on. So if you...
People just want to be entertained, right? They don't want to speak to an intellectual all the time.
I also just think that you're up against some forces that are about convenience, that are about attraction to technology, about, wanting to be forward-thinking and not stuck in the past and so on and so forth. So just like teens get sick of their parents, I think, parts of society aren't really interested in kind of long narratives, long investigations of what actually happens and so on and so forth. So if you look back, I think there are lots of people who actually 10, 15 years ago were saying that the things we care about in society, the values that underpin our society in Denmark and in Europe broadly, also in the US back then maybe to some degree, are actually being challenged by these companies. And these values are about simple things like fair competition. I think most people would agree that fair competition is a principle that is fairly good for society and is aligned with how we've built our prosperity and our growth, and also our kind of societies that take care of weak people and allow newcomers to get a chance in the market and so on and so forth. So a principle like fair competition is actually challenged by these companies. Another principle like security is challenged democracy is largely challenged. I mean, these forces were never really interested in democracy and institutions in the way that we have built them in Europe and so on and so forth. They may be talking about democratization and through social media and so on, but in practice they were not interested in preserving the kind of institutions that allow democracy to persist and play its role and so on and so forth. Then there are values like autonomy, or the individual as being able to make choices about their lives and so on and so forth. We've seen technology companies really kind of hitting hard at what you can think of as free will through developing technologies in collaboration with behavioral scientists in ways that really target the human mind and take away our sort of normal space for making informed, free decisions and so on and so forth. And then a final one I want to mention, a value that I think we all share and have protected in the past, is something like protecting children. That we have some things we spare children for, there are some things we make sure children don't encounter. And these companies also have kind of disregarded that kind of value. So they have no interest in protecting children. They have no interest in creating the kind of technical solutions that would allow, for instance, very simply, for us to verify whether a child is 7, 8, 9, 13, 15 or 18 when they go online, for instance.
So you're not a big fan of the Chromebooks in schools, I can guess.
Not. And I'm not a fan of all these technology companies that again and again say it's very difficult technically to do this, but at the same time they create totally incredible technological innovation that is much harder and much more expensive and much more difficult to do than simply verifying their users, whether it's kids online or we see a lot of focus right now on people using these platforms, social media platforms, for scams and cybercrime and so on and so forth.
But sometimes it seems like faceless, right? I think that was a problem for me with the Access as well. What I mentioned before is that they suddenly gave it a face and say, this is how we'll ground our models, right? And we're like, okay, you're actually saying this is the face of the technology, because to me it seems like there's no. You've seen Spirited Away with Chihiro, the old Japanese cartoon. There's this no face character, right? So the technology seems like it's a monster, but it's no face. It's just an algorithm, sort of sharing these things with people. It's just offering you gold, right? Just giving you whatever you want, right? And then it's eating you and devouring your mind. Like you're an endpoint to technology as well, right? And I think to some extent, the incentivization as a concept, right, where you say first you give value to the consumer, then you give value to business, then you end up taking value from both and giving it to the shareholders instead, and all the while the product gets worse.
Right.
It seems like the sort of the cycle that we're always in with technology, and it seems faceless. It seems like, okay, it's wasting our lives, but it doesn't want anything.
No.
I think XKCD, a comic, I'm doing a lot of cultural references here, sorry about that, but had a comic back in, 10, 15 years ago, where it was about Google saying, okay, now we own the world. We have all the money in the world. Now it's time to turn evil. Ha ha ha. In the boardroom. And they're like, so what do we want to do? I don't know. Have a LAN party. Or they had no plan for what they wanted to do when they turned evil, right? Do you get my point?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that facelessness is kind of disappearing at the moment.
Yeah, that was what I said. That's how I felt. It was changing. It was accelerating in a different way.
So to have, President Trump being inaugurated, and behind him or next to him having this, these 5 tech bosses, all the big tech companies, kneeling to this new president and paying for his inauguration and so on and so forth, and we have a very kind of visual understanding of what Elon Musk did in the U.S. administration with his chainsaw and the Doji project, setting up ways of installing AI to cut out public institutions and so on and so forth. So I think that facelessness is disappearing, and it's becoming very clear that these technologies and the visions they have for society come from somewhere, from a particular source, which is right now American, Silicon Valley based, very tied to political forces that are more or less aligned with the MAGA movement, and so on and so forth. So that kind of those things are becoming more apparent. And then I think also, again, what I said earlier was about the lack of experience as a reason for not really being interested in the kind of ideological or political ramifications of technology. And I think if we look back at the kind of many broken promises that have played out in the digital domain, I think people are starting to realize that what they were served was not what they got. So all the parents who saved up to buy an iPhone for their kid because they thought it would be the best thing for their kid to have, and then let that child have it in the bed at night and see things that the kid should not have seen, and so on and so forth. And I think the schools that allowed Chromebooks in there because they got them so cheaply also regretted it, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a ton of experience out there that the way technologies are packaged is not the way they play out in practice. And I think that kind of experience also takes away the kind of invisibility of these things.
But also, I think, no matter if you're on the face of technology, no matter if you, even if you're a MAGA supporter, right? You don't want technology to have a face, because what if it flips? I always say about bureaucracy as well. Why is it so slow? Because you don't want a person to take a decision on you. You want the system. A lot of people with no face to take a decision on you. That's why it has to be slow, right? And the same point, you want technology to just be infrastructure, exactly. Right? What if the road said, no, you can't drive here because you wrote it wrong yesterday? Just imagine physical infrastructure being that way, right? You can't take the train because of how you wrote it. That would be, I just think there's some absurdity here, right? That people are losing out on, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned before that infrastructure is where technology has become kind of invisible. And I think this is a really important point, because it reminds us that the things we install in those technologies as they become infrastructure will actually stay there.
Yeah.
So this is why we have to negotiate so hard right now about a new part of our infrastructure, which is the digital one, right? Because we have very well-developed transportation infrastructures. They work fairly well. We have some principles for how they should work and who should have access to our roads.
We have big governmental departments taking care of that as well.
Exactly.
What about digital?
Yeah, and we have, for electricity, even though we have a small island way off Bornholm, we still have, electricity companies delivering electricity to that place, even though it may not be a good business case for them. So we have these principles that, infrastructure should cover everyone. It should be operating under some kind of democratic control, and there should be competition in this area, and so on and so forth. So for all other types of infrastructure, we have really good systems in place. But for the digital infrastructures that are becoming our backbone in so many parts of social life and political life and commercial economic life, we don't have these things. And this kind of exceptionalism when it comes to the digital infrastructures is really important to talk about.
And just like, if you imagine, like, I always think about that, when you hear about Ukraine, just imagine having power outages all the time, having to think about infrastructure that way, and we don't have to do that. It just works. No. And the same when technology sort of takes off its mask, you suddenly don't have to think about it. And that's also what you're working on as well, right? But I think with these technologies, don't you think there's, too much lock-in already? Is it even possible to pull some of this back? It's like, people say, television is bad for kids. Let's pull it. No, you couldn't, right? Is it possible to go back again?
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that...
Or go somewhere else, maybe.
That we always kind of regulate technologies or other types of developments in hindsight or later on. I mean, we don't start with regulation and then wait for technology or things to happen. We see things happen, and then we start to think about how can we sort of tame these things, how can we align them with the things we value, and so on and so forth. And this is what we see in the digital domain also. A lot of work that's about creating this kind of alignment that I'm talking about. And regulation is one, but also investments in alternatives. And the reason why in my work for the Danish government as chairman of the expert group for tech giants, we insisted on talking about digital infrastructure, because exactly from this viewpoint that I just mentioned, that we can think about how we develop and govern other infrastructures, and we can use the same principles to make sure that digital infrastructure supports the society that we want. So I don't think there's anything kind of extraordinary about regulating things after they arrive. I mean,
but regulating will not, make the bad actors behave better, right?
No, but then investing in alternatives, building, thinking about how to do industrial politics in ways that will speak to our interests or nurture our interests, and so on. So
I also see the money involved right now, right? It's so big that Denmark can't possibly compete.
No, and this is why we're also talking about digital sovereignty or digital independence or autonomy. How can we create kind of a digital future where we both have technology companies in Europe, we have prosperity in Europe, we have technical solutions in Europe that match our needs, and we create some kind of guardrails or barriers to these types of companies and countries or states that we don't feel comfortable with at the moment, right? So this is why, you talked about growing up at a time when we had hopes about global communication.
I was a child in the 90s, right?
Yeah, so these hopes about globalization, about a kind of shared collective way of solving societal challenges, those things are kind of coming apart at the moment, obviously. So these geopolitical rifts are really what will shape, the next 20, 30, 50 years, I think. Really thinking about what Europe wants, how it can collaborate with its new allies and separate itself from those that are no longer our allies, and so on and so forth. So I think that's the huge kind of political, industrial politics project that we're looking into. And we just have to say China and the US are moving more in this direction than we are. I mean, they're focusing more on their national or regional interests than we have been good at in Europe.
And that's also because, we gave birth to the internet through liberalism, right? And they gave birth to it through authoritarianism. It's a different way, right? So for us, structuring it and ordering it would be anti-liberal, right? And I think that's maybe the core of, or at the heart of the problem for Europe and for the West to say, can we, this is our liberal dream, right? The internet could be the liberal dream.
Yeah,
we really need to.
This is also what shaped our way of thinking about trade and so on.
Yeah.
And liberal free trade approaches.
We need to counter revolution.
All those things need to be reconsidered.
And I also think, I think I've mentioned it before on the podcast in I can't remember which episode, but that, we have, if someone wanted to bomb my house, we would have an F-35 plane on the wings and trying to, stop them immediately. But if someone tries to hack into me, I need to have my own antivirus. Is this something that you're also looking at in the expert group?
Well, certainly that in many ways, the kind of Wild West nature of the digital domain means that a lot of challenges and problems have been individualized.
Yeah.
So in many ways, what we focused on in the expert group was to say we need some structural interventions. We need, it's fine that parents are good parents and look after their kids, but we also need kind of structural arrangements, institutional arrangements that protect children. And this is the example I normally give is, it's a little bit like if you as a parent take your kid, there's a playground in Copenhagen where you can train your kid how to act in traffic. It's called the traffic playground. Take your kids there and you can teach them how to sort of follow the rules and when to stop for a red light and how to indicate that you're going to the right and so on and so forth. And the idea is obviously you can train your kid in that playground and then you can take him into the rest of society and it'll work the same way. And the thing is, in the digital domain, you can teach your kids so many things, but once you let them go on the internet, go online everywhere, there are no rules in place.
Yeah, there are. You might be showing around a place where there's traffic lights, but then in the real world there are no traffic lights. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the digital domain is again exceptional. So it's very hard for parents to know what to train their kids for, and it's a very huge burden to put on parents
so
and
it's difficult
kids.
for them, to if they don't understand the world themselves or interact in it themselves. Like the movie Adolescence that was it last year? Yeah, I can't remember. Last year, I think you saw that one, obviously, right? Where the kids are communicating and they're saying things that mean something completely different to what even the police and everyone thinks it means, right? So the criminal is another person than you think, which created an outcry in the UK because they're like, is this happening? Right? Yes, it is.
And this is really what is a huge problem in the digital domain, that we don't have these institutional structural arrangements in place that that can help us navigate and can help protect us and so on and so forth. So in many ways, I think we need to make the shift from individualizing problems in the digital domain to also having these kind of institutional arrangements. And I'm not saying parents should not be responsible, kids should not learn things and behave themselves and sort of learn the rules of the game, but we need both. It's a complete kind of a failure to think that all these things can be solved by the individual, by parents, by kids. Or
maybe it can be solved by a chatbot.
Yeah, except if that chatbot also is somehow rogue, right?
Yeah, but then you can always make them talk about. I always said, China came up with some of the first regulation of AI, saying that it can't talk about anything that's non-communist, right? I remember I was like, but this one, even if you remove everything about liberal democracy, it can infer it. It's liberalism on steroids, right? There's no control here, right?
Right.
So this must be accelerating the problem that you're talking about to some extent.
Absolutely.
Snapchat just adding AI, and it's just a tool. Like a gun is just a tool.
Yeah. And again, I mean, how can you expect small kids to understand when they're engaging with the chatbot, when they're engaging with a human person, and what kind of indications to look for, and so on and so forth. So again, we also see it increasingly with toys, with AI built in.
I saw that as well.
Think about
was
that.
Like, okay, I hope this is a niche.
Yep, and also maybe something we need to regulate, right? Because, I mean, if you have a super advanced AI teddy bear in your kid's bedroom.
Is this a horror movie you're writing?
No, this is this is what's happening. It's
sounds like a bad plot from the 80s.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it exceeds our fantasies in some ways, right?
And then this neutral teddy bear. I think people are dreaming about this as well, right? This is, we wanted to have if we put AI into a teddy bear, it's because we want it to just be a neutral playmate saying fun things, right? But it's technology and data, and I want to ask you this because this is also something that I know you've done other studies about. Is technology and data ever neutral, right? And data platforms and just core business stuff as well, right? When we get even down to even the small things. Now we're talking macro before, but even the things that we're using every day, are they ever neutral? Is data ever neutral, right? I think it's a basic question, and it might sound stupid, but it's an important one, I think, because people believe in neutrality still.
No, technologies are never neutral. They always come from somewhere. They're always built by somebody. They always have a purpose, something they're built for, something they're good for, something they're not so good for. And they also get entangled in all these types of situations and dynamics that are social or human or organizational and so on and so forth. So certainly not. And I think what is interesting is to then unpack what technology is if it's not neutral. What does it do? So, I mean, I think my overall kind of interest in my work and in the policy work I do and so on and so forth is to shift the conversation away from what technology is to what it does to us. That's where I have my interest. So a lot of people are really excited about new technologies. I mean, right now we have so many people totally excited about AI because it can do so many things in their minds, right? And what we don't understand and what we don't talk about is what it's going to do to us.
But it's a funny thing is because it's what I'm a consultant, right? But it is actually something that I've said also. I've thought about this a lot. That with AI, can produce so many technology products. It did, vibe coding and all that. It means that the product becomes, worthless. The value of product or tech goes to zero because you can spin it up. So what do you want it to do instead? What is the purpose? What will it do to you? It's the only thing left, right? And a relevant demand that you can measure and you can understand, right? So, but people still keep on going to say, AI, where can it do something for me tomorrow? Where can AI? Yeah, but what do you want to do?
Exactly.
What's your problem? What's your dream? I need to know that. You need to give me something to work with, because I can show you AI doing blah blah blah, but then you'll be like, oh, it's irrelevant. Yep, because technology is irrelevant, right?
And this is why questions about alignment are absolutely central. I mean, that's where things happen.
Technology amplifies, right? You said that it's not neutral; it's an amplifier.
Yeah, but it's also a machine that is coded in particular ways. It is, it is some kind of imprint of the minds of the people who develop it or invest in it, and so on and so forth. So this is why we always need to think about, what are the technological choices being made? What are the kind of investment choices being made? What are the commercial visions that get built into these products? And right now we see it with AI. I mean, the shift in OpenAI from working on many different projects and wanting to tackle the challenges of humanity in a non-profit setup to what we see now, where it's a chatbot.
AI, open.
Yeah. I mean, at some point they decided not to pursue the other projects and just go with the chatbot, because there were some investors, including Bill Gates and others, who thought this is really exciting. So those kind of choices that end up actually shaping what AI is right now. I mean, for everyone right now, AI is a chatbot that is kind of domain agnostic, can talk about anything, and it's not really tuned to anything in particular. And soon will have some advertising built in and other types of stuff that will create some new problems that will be, I think, facing for the next decades when it comes to the kind of shift from having advertisements. I mean, if you look at Google, for instance, Larry Page and Sergey Brin were quite explicit when they developed the Google PageRank algorithm that this kind of system should not have advertising, because it would pollute the results and it would serve the interests of the advertisers and not of the users.
Jesus also said that church shouldn't be rich and stuff.
Yes. So what happened at Google obviously was that there was a commercial pressure to monetize this invention, and then we got all these advertisements, mixed into the results. But at least at Google, in a Google search, you can sort of identify that the top results are paid for, and the kind of column that runs in the top is, paid for by Google having alliances with some companies that sell those products. And then further down, you'll find the kind of organic search results.
The SEO searches, I don't know. It's so messy.
But with AI, I mean, those things are going to be so much more complicated, because what you get from a chatbot is a kind of ready-made piece of text. So
that's already eaten the sources and sort of spit them out again in ways you don't know.
So advertising is going to get baked in, just like ideologies right now are baked in to these responses. And I think that creates a whole new situation where it becomes even more difficult to navigate what is ideology, what is advertising, what is...
Because the text is not the ingredients, right? The text is the meal, right? So you have ingredients, which are the sources, then what is the who had the recipe? Where's the recipe? You don't know, right?
You don't know. And you don't know what gets baked in, right?
No. So you just eat a meal and you're like, oh, okay. Actually, when you with these AI overviews, I read them. I glance at them, I think I would rather say, and then I skip them as fast as possible, because I try not to read them, because they'll influence how I'll be looking at the sources.
Right.
And it's just so annoying to me. And I work with AI all the time. I'm a proponent for it. I want to use it for doing things that make sense. And, obviously, technology is also a driver for good things or for more efficiency and all that, right? But I really, really hate.
Yeah, but maybe this is a chance to also think about choosing an alternative browser. There are good alternative browsers out there, and some of them don't have this kind of...
You saw my initial reaction here, sorry.
But this is, again, I guess, convenience and habit and so on and so forth.
So I'm just a sheep here. That's.
But we all are. I mean, this is also the moment we face right now, where we have to make both the kind of big choices when it comes to infrastructure that I talked about, but we also have to make the kind of choices as individuals and companies in terms of what we support. So I think, again, I talked about these shared values that everyone would more or less agree to in Denmark and Europe about protecting children, about fair trade, fair competition, and democracy, and so on and so forth. And those, I mean, if you test some of the solutions from the big tech companies that we all use now, test them against those values and principles, I think it would be easy for you to say, I don't want to contribute to this machinery. I don't want to.
But I just need to, because I always say this when people say, we just need everyone to buy ecological or biological products, or we need people stop eating meat because, and or we need to waste less and all that. And then it becomes all about the consumer, consumerist policies and all that. And you need to. But I think people think that the meat consumption in Denmark has gone down. If you ask people in Copenhagen, right, because they eat less meat, but the meat consumption has gone up in Denmark as a whole, right. The only thing it does is stratify, and make some people look down on other people and saying, "Why don't you have ecological milk?" I remember that back in the noughties, I didn't have a lot of money, and my parents didn't have a lot of money, and I didn't have that. And people were like, some people didn't want to drink my milk, right? And I felt so shamed. Is this just a shaming thing? Is it even going to matter? Is my question. Or do we need politics and mass production? All that,
Yeah, so, I mean, we have...
Because if it's stratification, I get so tired of that as well, because that's about aesthetics.
Yeah, no, I think it's more than stratification. I think this is how change happens. You can't sort of separate the big political choices we make about what companies we allow, what conditions we give to companies, what kind of restrictions we make for companies. So that's the regulation part. And the investment part, what we invest in, what we think of as a kind of... And obviously, I think digital infrastructure should be a huge part of our investments as a society. I think
next election, too.
Yes, absolutely. And then, obviously, there are the personal choices that we're talking about right now. And I think if you look at all that sort of change, those things have to come together. I mean, because if people start to realize that the choices they make about how much they fly, what kind of products they buy, and so on and so forth, actually have an influence on the environment, then they will start to look at how politicians are making choices about the environment, what companies destroy our climate, which companies try to build solutions that protect our climate, and so on and so forth. So I think those things have to go together. And obviously, you can always argue that, what individuals do is not going to make a difference, and it doesn't in the numbers or in the kind of direct effect. But change only happens once people start to realize that what is it I'm contributing to. So I think by comparison, I think most people who could go into a toy store and have a football that was sewn by a child in Bangladesh for, say, 20 Danish kroner and pay 100 kroner for a football that was created under better conditions, where no kids had to stay out of school and work in a factory and so on and so forth, people would be willing to spend that extra money.
Do you know how many people buy from Timo and Wish?
I know. So I may be also living in a kind of bubble. But I think there's at least a growing kind of...
It's funny because you're saying change is about people changing their mindset, right? And at the same time, we're talking about how technology is changing the world, right? Just because of this, this blind consumerism of technology, right?
Absolutely.
But I thought about, again, back to this ecological food, right? I went to a shop I live in Elsinore, right? I went to a shop a couple of months back where they had absolutely no meat products that were ecological. Nothing. Nothing. Like not even minced beef, or it's just nothing. I was like, what's going on? Where am I? You don't care about. And I remember that at some point, some of the food stores had made some political choices to present these things more often than like Co-op did that 20 years ago. Started to bring, but if these things stop, then the choice becomes it doesn't exist, and then And it's maybe the same thing that we're seeing with technology right now, that you're trying to obviously create a demand so we can create the products, so we can, but this will take years.
Absolutely. And this is a huge, long struggle in many different domains, right? This kind of balance between people wanting the cheapest product and people wanting to support causes and support the future that
shops selling the cheapest products as well.
Also that, yeah. So that's a huge challenge, and it's also one we see in the digital domain. But I think it's a bad idea to sort of write off any kind of personal engagement as irrelevant. Also in making choices about what technologies you use and so on. So we have in Denmark the kind of Denmark Shifts Day coming up, which is this idea that there's going to be a particular day in March where all the people who are sick of wasting their time on Instagram and other kinds of platforms and contributing to the Facebook machineries and so on and so forth, either through spending their money on advertising on those platforms or spending their precious time on those platforms, will actually move to alternative platforms. And I think this is in some ways symbolic and small, but it's also really about engaging people and making people think about these things in ways that are closer to home. So we started out this conversation talking about how irrelevant politics seem to people when they use technology in the 2010 and so on. So back in those days, and I think those things are changing now. So it's becoming a kind of something that people care about, and it's becoming a matter of concern for parents, for school teachers, for everyone who's had these kind of experiences with
and there's
technology.
there's definitely a joining of interest in that, because what we talked about earlier, that no one listened to, and no one listens to the intellectuals. I remember an article by one of my favorite historians, Tony Judt, about a Cold War historian, who wrote that, an article about the death of the intellectual, because they sort of dominated the Cold War, intellectuals on all sides, French, and all that, and they sort of died. No one listened to them anymore, right? And now we're talking about elites running, shifting and all that, but maybe it will work in the geopolitical pressure. This has become a security issue for Denmark too, right?
Absolutely.
So it has political attention. It's not just something that a niche group of professors who has known it for 30 years are saying now, right?
Right.
So you've sort of been crying wolf, and now they're like, okay, there's a wolf now. Yeah, I told you, right?
And I just think you have to accept that change is very slow, and it takes so many different types of forces and dynamics to come together. So I'm actually quite hopeful about our digital future, even if some of the perspectives I've shared may sound gloomy and a little bit, or very critical actually. I think there's lots of hope also in the tech domain.
What are you hopeful? How are you hopeful?
I'm hopeful about the kind of growing political awareness that digital infrastructures are so central to our societies that we cannot have them work against society.
I think that is extremely needed, like we also just discussed. And everyone wants digital to be a political subject. Maybe that's where I might be conflicted a little bit, because, as I said before, we also want it to be liberal, right? This dream of I feel like I can say it. I can say that I believe we need it to be political, but at the same time, all of my criticism from the beginning was also that it suddenly got a face, and I'm so annoyed. I want to go back to it not having a face. Do you understand what I'm getting?
Yeah, but I think we should be open to the possibility that we could have all the amazing tools and technologies that digital transformations have given us, but we can have them on other terms and conditions. We can have them in shapes and forms that actually respect and support and work with our values. So in many ways, I think of the kind of shared values I've been talking about as almost product specifications. This should be the kind of demands we have for digital products or digital tools that will be our digital infrastructure.
But like in a recent episode, I just had Workday's global AI lead on the podcast, for instance, right? And if someone then wants to say, okay, Workday's HR suite is the best of breed, and everyone knows it's the best in the world, and we can't have it in Denmark suddenly because it's not on Danish data center. So then we don't get the best. Then we're rolling back something, aren't we? Are we losing out on something?
Yeah, but again, what would be the argument for not?
Becomes mercantilism again, or it becomes some protectionism again, doesn't it?
Yeah, but I'm just saying maybe we should work with companies who are willing to sort of accept our terms and conditions as a society. And if those terms and conditions are about we need data to be on site in our territory, so we can regulate it. Maybe that's a fair demand.
Be a trade-off, right? It will be something like when we say we need to do it with Europe, or because Denmark would not be interesting, right?
Sure. But again, I think most of Europe shares a lot of values.
Yeah. We would like to say that, right? But and that's are Europe really at a disadvantage when it comes to technology? A lot of people are saying that as well.
Well, we've talked a little bit about it. I mean, obviously, Europe has not invested in and created the best conditions for tech companies, and also had this free trade idea that any product could be sourced from anywhere, and it doesn't really matter where it comes from, as long as it's cheap and it can be part of a long production chain or a long kind of value chain. So I think Europe is certainly at a disadvantage, but Europe also has the size and a lot of things going for us that actually make it possible for us to think about creating industries, giving better conditions for companies, building tech solutions that speak to respect our values and our laws. And
so you don't believe it's the regulation that's sort of moving against us?
I don't think regulation is the only problem. And regulation, I mean, if you talk about fair competition, that requires regulation.
Yes.
Because, so in many ways, this idea that regulation is the big...
I'm saying it because it's...
Yeah, a lot of people are saying,
Yeah. I think that personally it's a highway, right, to move faster. But anyway.
Yeah, I think regulation is needed. And I think we have to think about the kind of society that the US is developing into because of a lack of regulation is probably not the society that we want. So I think we also need to think about the kind of outcomes of having no regulation in place.
This is so normative. I think the discussion today, the conversation here is so normative, and it just surprises me. It just surprises me, and I think maybe that's also why we need to have it, because it is so difficult about technology to have this kind of nominal. If someone was talking about geopolitics on the podcast, then it would be written with normatives, right? But now we're suddenly talking about we need to stop talking and what society are they? Technology is for shaping the society. You see my point, right? It's just it comes back to me all the time here in this conversation, that I feel myself holding back on myself because this is uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable to speak about the roads this way or the railroads this way.
Absolutely. But if we had roads and transportation systems and electricity systems that had the same kind of diseases that the digital domain has, we would also be talking about those things. If suddenly particular parts of society had no electricity, if some kind of vehicles were not allowed on the road, and so on and so forth. And this is so the reason why we have to talk about the politics of the digital domain is obviously this tech exceptionalism that I've talked about. We have allowed the tech domain, the digital domain, to operate outside our normal rules and expectations and ethics and values.
Yeah. And nothing is powerless, right? And nothing is everything is
full of power.
Full of power. That was what I wanted to say. Exactly. Full of power. Yes. Full of grace. That was the wrong. But you also said that there's some other things that has put us at a disadvantage. I just want to touch on that again, because I think in Europe we've had free education for so long, right? How on earth can we not be a leader in technology? Most of the European countries have free universities, right? Almost free universities and schooling and all that. But we're losing to the US, where it costs tons of money. How is that even, what's wrong with our educational system? Is something wrong?
Well, one of the sort of beautiful things about science and education and universities as an institution and so on is the slowness, right? These are stable
No idea how much I love that you said that. Anyway, let's move on.
So the university is, and education as a kind of institution is certainly, persistent, and it's kind of focused on keeping its position and, playing that role in society. And there are amazing things about this. It creates, a kind of some resistance to and resilience against, quick disruptive forces and so on and so forth. But the flip side of it is that it takes a long time to sort of change things in universities and in education. And I think just like many people in the policy domain have talked about the problems with tech companies for a long time, the same people or other people in universities have spoken about the need for a stronger focus on technology in education. So really building amazing programs that integrate technology as a kind of central dimension, one pillar of what you need to know about if you're a student who wants to go into sociology or business or any kind of topic. So the problem has been that a lot of the technology focus has been in kind of isolated tech IT programs and not thought of as a kind of fundamental skill that everyone needs to have.
So we have we been, someone say Europe is a museum, right? Have we been focusing too much on museum stuff, or?
I think because
it's slow to change, which is a stability thing, whereas other places it's funded directly by, companies and all that,
So that kind of, the resilience I talked about has good and bad sides,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And the bad side is that it takes a long time to get these things, this kind of insight into research-based teaching and into kind of institutional reforms that create the kind of university programs and education more broadly. I mean, we have it also in the early school years in Copenhagen, in Denmark, a lot of discussions about how much, should it be mandatory for students to learn about technology, or can it be an elective that some kids choose to learn about, and so on and so forth. And I think it's just taken a long time to really kind of create the foundation for technology development and technology innovation and the kind of things we need to navigate in the digital domain. So this is coming, but it's certainly slower than I think a lot of people would like it to be.
But some people are also saying right now that we will need, and I've spoken about this also previously, that we'll need, I've asked if we need longer or shorter education. I said actually longer, because that has been, whenever we've automated things, we've always added longer education or more training on the job before you get to the real positions. I don't know, 100 years ago you were an adult at 22, right? Now you're an adult when you're like 40 or something like that, right? So do you believe in longer or shorter education, and will education institutions with something like AI become more irrelevant or even more relevant? It's a terribly big question.
I think certainly we will need more education, and I think more targeted education in the things that we've also been talking about in this show. The kind of skills you need to make sense of digital transformations are really needed. But I think it's not necessarily that everyone has to do 6 years of university. I think there could be shorter programs that are enough for some tasks, and then I think that we should focus on sort of bringing people back into universities or into education throughout their careers and so on and so forth. So I actually like the idea of kind of lifelong learning.
But you didn't say AI any place here, anyway.
No, I don't think. I mean, just like the other technologies that I've followed and explored and investigated throughout my research career, I'm waiting for AI to become a normal technology. It's going to fall into place as yet another part of our toolbox, part of our everyday lives and our work and so on and so forth. And it's not going to be as exceptional as it is right now. So I'm waiting for technologies to become boring, and then we start to see and this is what I mean by shifting the attention away from what technologies can into what they do to us. And once they become normal and boring and part of everyday life, we start to see what they actually do to us. And so I think AI, again, will not revolutionize education, and it'll be another, helpful tool in some ways, but also a distraction and something that sometimes takes away attention from what learning actually is and should be, I think.
It's brilliant that you said that, because I wanted to ask you, are we moving from an information age to an AI age? Because what you just said, and everything you've said, you've talked about patterns that look the same, it doesn't seem like you see it that way.
No. So I don't really buy these kind of
it's not electricity to you.
hype cycles. Well, I mean, would you say that we lived in the electricity age at some point? I'm not sure. I think really in many ways,
it's always
the way I look at it is not kind of one epoch to another and something gets replaced by a new kind of, I mean, those are kind of hype cycles more than they're actual societal development cycles. So I think in many ways, all the technologies we can think about have fallen into place in our lives, in society. We still have electricity, we still have some kind of printing presses, we still have radio, we have all these things, the internet, and AI will also fall into place in this. So I think of it more as a kind of
still, language is going, to zero. Language is free now. Text is free, right? Thinking without reflection or without non-epistemic thinking is free. This must mean something, right?
Yeah, but then, I mean, once you realize that the kind of thinking and the kind of writing that a chatbot can deliver is not up to the level of quality or
then you won't buy
experience,
Wish. But you see,
intimacy, whatever, then I think you will start to notice the difference. I mean, in many ways, the printing press was a promise that everything would be accessible and information would be free. The internet was the same kind of promise. Search engines were the same kind of promise. And AI is just an extension of that. And obviously it is changing the kind of level or the entry barriers to having access to information and language and knowledge and so on and so forth. But I don't think it's ever going to replace things that come from humans.
There's something fundamental, right? Civilizations and states and all that everywhere from Mesopotamia, they don't, okay, I'm a historian, so we only, I was a trained historian, so we only dealt with, things that happened when they were written sources, right? So that maybe that shapes it, right, as well. But language is so fundamental, right? In everything, all the narratives, all the stories about who we are and what we are and how we communicate, how we trust our structures. And now we have something that's just made it free and inconsequential almost. I can't help but feel like there's something here that might actually be an earthquake.
Mm-hmm. But again, I mean, I guess the title of this podcast speaks to an idea that you can sort of isolate one constant, or that what you're saying about language now is about sort of isolating language away from everything that language gets woven into.
Yeah.
And I think my focus is different. I'm interested in, what language does as part of a kind of human lived experience and what technology does as part of a human lived experience. And so I'm interested in these kind of interweavings between the whole fabric that makes up our lives and then
not what technology we do now, but what we can do now will change how we'll do things in the future and how we will maybe stop consuming before we're consumed. I think you're exactly talking about the things that I always find so interesting, how ecosystems change over time and not just about right now, this can do what a lawyer did to my NDA yesterday, so now I will never need a lawyer. No, but you'll still have conflict in the future. There's some other things going on here, right, that I think is so important to understand, right?
Absolutely.
And I think it's about the constant, right? Is the funny thing is about the only constant, and I'll get to asking you the question in a moment. Is that it's called the only constant, but I've asked the question 86. This is the 87th time I'm asking it. So do I really believe you could ask? but it is always, for me. It's also asking about that is also a way of asking my guest to. I shouldn't talk about it because that ruins the show, but it's always a way of trying to understand where do you look at the world from, because different perspectives, and I believe humans are in so many ways endpoints, towards each other. We're interfaces, right? And we exist, in this interaction. So understanding what drives you, what drives the way you think of the world, is, and this accumulation of these constants becomes a constant. That's not a constant. I've not said what I think is the only constant, but I'm just thinking here out loud.
Sure.
But that, I think this has been a brilliant conversation, and it's been a different conversation as well. I think, a title of this could be The Politics of the Digital Domain, and something else I always add to, because all my titles are sort of meditations today. Like old books on the something and the something else, right? So just to say nothing is simple.
No, exactly.
I have one final question for you, Mikkel.
I'm ready.
So, Mikkel, what is the only constant?
For me, technology would be it. And I don't mean technology as the only force that dominates everything else or determines everything else. But what I mean by technology as a constant is that throughout human history, we have always tackled or argued with technologies. So that kind of tackling is for me a constant. Every society, every moment in history will have to deal with these technologies and create some kind of alignment between what you want in your life, what your organization or your company wants, what the society you're part of wants, and to argue with technology in ways that make those things aligned. That's where you can understand a lot of things about humans, about business, about politics, and about technology. So I think that kind of attempt to create some kind of useful alignment between technology and society is where a lot of exciting things happen.
That's a great dialectic, hermeneutic answer. I don't know.
Maybe.
Which I really like and adhere to myself. So I think that's a brilliant constant.
Good. Great.
Thank you very
Thanks
much
for the conversation.
It's been brilliant having you, Mikkel. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend or a colleague.